Very pleased to be here. We're here today to talk about separation anxiety, which I think is probably likely to be a little more up than it might normally be, partly because we're at the end of the school holidays and going back to school brings up challenges of separation and feelings more. And it's not just about being away from you, it's that your kids have spent a time with you. And also, I think the times and the lockdown that we had and coming out of lockdown and coming out of that intense time together, which there were some things that were really wonderful about that. I heard a program about dads. You know, many fathers have had a quite profound experience of being able to spend a lot more time with their kids. But many of us were also trying to handle work and school at home. And so it was intense. But as our children move away from us and separate from us again to return to school, there'll be a lot of feelings around. So it's very topical. So welcome. Thanks to Google Translate. I'm language disabled, I would say. I was only raised with English. So I love to be in touch. So do just let me know if it turns out that I've got something wrong there. And just to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm sitting today, who are the Wongal people of the Eora Nation, and their elders, past and present. And I think it's important to acknowledge that Indigenous culture survives and thrives, and that we've all gained from what Indigenous people have lost. We benefit daily from the care they took of this country, and we have a lot to learn from them. So I like to start here. Parenting's hard, and we end up feeling really bad about it a lot of the time. And that's such a raw deal. and becomes part of the challenge, I think. So I like to start here with the truth about you, which is that you are a good parent. You have always tried the very best that you can. If you had been able to do anything different, you would have. Even in your parenting fails, they're done with your best heart, and we don't have enough support and we don't have enough often information, so it doesn't always go well, but we're also under a lot of pressure. So as a parent, you face real struggles and difficulties, and you are so not to blame for these. There are things that will be your responsibility to correct and to change. There'll be connection that only you can build with your children that will make a huge difference. But you are not to blame for the way the world's organised. That's not that helpful to parents. So, you're not to blame for how hard home at school was. It was awful, really. And anyway, I have quite strong opinions about it. I think we just have to do the best we can in that area and accept that we're not our children's teachers and that this is going to be really tough. Happy to chat with people about that, So someday you'll get a little rest. And here's my dear husband. I have quite a lot of shots. We have these friends, they have their really comfortable couches. And I have quite a lot of photos of my husband looking a bit like this on their couches. So someday you will get a little rest. And just as Marie said, you're on silent. Marie is my very competent assistant. You can put your questions in at the end. I think there's a menu bar, and if you click on Q&A, which some of you have already figured out, you can ask your questions and we'll try to get to them towards the end. And the council are posting the recording of this webinar a little later with some sweet editing, I think. But you'll get sent a link to that recording at some point, and straight after this webinar, you'll get an email. So look out for it. And I have to say these days, check your spam if it doesn't turn up. You'll get an email with a whole bunch of links to resources that I've collected that you'll find helpful. And in particular, I love, this is a cool way of communicating, but I really love to hear from you. So feel free to book a free 20-minute consultation. We can have a chat. I might be able to point you in the direction of some things that will help, and we can figure things out from there. But I really love to hear from you. I love to hear, even if you just want to ring up and say, you know, I found this interesting and I don't know, you can improve on that. Anyway, feel free to be in touch. And the other thing, just to kind of get out in front, is that parenting is tough and we all make mistakes and we do it with the best of intentions. I recently saw someone else did a webinar with this great set of photos. So here is this darling little duck. She's decided to take her little ducklings for a walk, but she didn't plan all that well. And perhaps she needed a bit of information about what happens when you walk over something like that, because she ran into trouble. And parenting's a little like that. And our aim, my aim at hand in hand parenting, which I'll tell you a little bit about later. My aim is to help you avoid and recover from your parenting fails. And most of us are really focused on trying to avoid them. But there's at least, in fact, in some ways, we have much more control over the repair. And the listening tools and the approach that I'm about to talk about offers you tools for both getting a plan for separation, which is separation is completely predictable. There's no reason why we can't plan for it. But also how to recover from times where you perhaps haven't been able to manage it all that well. The repair is as important and the thing that you can really control. So, and this is my little family. That young girl is now 16. I can't quite believe it. I've done all sorts of things in my life. And the most wonderful was being a parent. It was better late than never. I managed to get organised to do that in the last minute. I wouldn't recommend putting it off that late. And I've been working with Hand in Hand for about 30 years, so a long time before I became a parent. So I really understood many things about this approach before I became a parent, which was so helpful. But I've learned so much more since becoming a parent, in the closeness of my relationship with my daughter and in the dynamic of my family environment. And my daughter really just knew what to do when she was born. She knew how to recover from the emotional stresses and tensions that she encountered. She knew how to connect. She still does. She rounds me up regularly and tells me she needs a hug several times a day, which is, I work with lots of parents of teens and I know that that's not that usual. But she just knew what to do, and that really inspired me to share this with other parents in a more organised way. And also teaching and doing this work that I do means I'm in contact with and connecting with lots of other parents. And I find that's really important to keeping my perspective correct. So I run regular groups for parents, and I do a lot of one-on-one work, but there's something about being in a group where you get to hear other people's struggles and we create a very confidential environment. But it gives you perspective that these ways that the world is coming into your family and forcing things on you, and I just think school at home is a perfect example of where, for good reasons out there in the world, something gets pushed onto us as parents, and we're expected to figure out how to handle it with very little sort of, if we're lucky, the school was able to give us some support, but really, a whole new piece of our relationship with our children without any training. So that, that's what happens to us. So it's great to be in a group and get some perspective that you're not the only one. There's a way that the places where we struggle as parents become our personal problem. And actually, a lot of it is to do with the setup. And having perspective on that really helps. As I said, there's lots of things we're responsible for fixing or getting right in the first place, but it's not our fault, and it's hard for good reasons. So my aim today is to explain a little about why separations are hard, and to give you some tools for how you can help your child with the challenge of separating from you for short periods of time. And I love working with parents around separation because it's a completely predictable event. There are ways that our children's feeling about it and our feelings about it will at times hijack us. But a lot of the time, we know the separation's coming, and we know that our child has some pretty big feelings about it. So that makes it easy to work with. We can actually set it up to begin to handle it at times when we actually have the slack to handle it. So you need to prepare for the challenge of managing and helping your child with their feelings about separation. It doesn't have to be awful. And the way that you prepare is to do with building safety into your relationship with your child. It's about topping up their sense of being connected to you. And that's what helps get them through separation from you, with an ability to be confident about being away from you, to enjoy the time that they're away from you, to handle whatever's thrown at them. And if they have big feelings about being away from you, your capacity to handle those will be hugely improved if your child has a really strong sense of you being on their side and being connected to them. So we use play and listening to create safety, and I'll talk about a couple of listening tools that are very efficient for building the playing in certain kinds of ways and listening in certain kinds of ways that really build emotional safety into your relationship with your child. And really important is how you get support. Parenting's emotional work, and I don't know that that's really sort of clear. It's a bit like, how demanding it is emotionally. And you need support, and you need to build support networks around yourself in order to get the space you need to figure out what's going on. For you, time to plan, but also what's going on for you emotionally, which is a lot of what makes parenting hard. And then I'm going to talk about effectively limit setting. It is. Some of you may have been at our last webinar, which is, I think, up on the web, where I talked about limit setting. Most of the challenges that we face in our parenting, especially those issues which are persistent, where our relationship with our child is getting into a really regular snarl or very predictable snarl around something, those are actually challenges in limit setting. And the longer I parent and the longer I work with these tools, the clearer it is to me that really it's all about limit setting, which isn't that you have to harshly set limits everywhere, but it's about understanding how you need to help children with their struggles and provide, I guess you could call it course correction, but in ways that both build on your connection with your child and don't damage your relationship with your child. So I'm going to talk about limit limits, and because separation really is a limit. It's like they want to stay and you have to go, or they want you to stay and they have to go. That's a limit. And how you handle limits is a lot of what this approach is about. And there's a particular way we can work with it, which we call the long goodbye. So I'll talk a little bit about that. It's a fair bit of ground to cover, so we'll see how we go. And you can learn more in the email that you get sent out. It'll have links. I can really recommend the Listening to Children booklets. There's also a book called Listen, written by Patty Whitfler, who founded Hand in Hand Parenting in Palo Alto in the US. But I love the booklets. You can't get them in print anymore, but you can get them online. They're very well written and they're short. So you can just read part of one in the loo while you're trying to keep away from your kids, make a bit of space. You'll also find, I find I lend them to people a lot. You can get in touch with me. And I recommend, if separation anxiety is a big issue in your family, I recommend getting a really thorough picture of why it's a problem and what you can do to tackle it. And Hand in Hand Parenting offers some fantastic short online courses, particularly good if you hook them up with some one-on-one time to just map out with me, what your particular challenge is, because every family has a different brand of the same issue. So there'll be things we need to think about how this might work in your family. But that short course, which is about 3 hours of video divided into 3 classes, and each of those classes is broken up into about 15 minutes segments. So you can watch it in bite-sized pieces, and it will explain why connection is important, how you can build connection, and how to understand limit setting, separations as a limit setting exercise, and how to deal with your children's upset about it. And there's a bunch of other resources I've got there, including another talk I did and some stuff you might find helpful. So Hand in Hand Parenting is about, I call it the love triangle. So on one hand is sort of the bit that we often get quite focused on, which is correction. That's limit settings. That's setting limits. And actually, mostly our kids are needing us to set a limit because they're actually off track emotionally. They can't think. And I'll talk a bit more about that. So the way limit setting works in this framework is that we're hoping to resolve that underlying emotional tension. It's an emotional process that allows thinking to come online afterwards. And that's a really key understanding, that emotions get in the way of thinking, that we need to handle emotions, and then our kids can do what makes sense. They can think about a workable solution. So there's the limit setting or the correction process where things are off track. But at least as important is the process of connection, of building your child's sense that you're really on their side. Because when you do that, and you have to bring a limit when you're not on their side, where they don't feel that you're on their side, there's somewhere in their brain or their heart, they can hang on to that place where they really know you're on their side. So we teach child-directed play to build your relationship. A couple of ways to do that. Today, I'm going to talk about a most marvelous tool called Special Time. And then at the foundation of the triangle, really, is the support that you need. We teach adult-to-adult listening tools that are about giving you a chance to offload the tensions you've accumulated around parenting, get understanding of what's going on, and make some plans. And that's what I think self-care is. I actually hate the phrase self-care. It's like, God, if I could care for myself, I would. Don't tell me to do self-care. So I don't know, bumps into something for me, but getting a place to work through why I'm ending up parenting differently from how I want to, what's driving my difficulty, and understanding how that works, getting a chance as you build connection with a listener to resolve some of my emotional tensions around it, and then I can think, then I can plan for what to do. And I think getting information and getting some support yourself is really important to do before you take on a big emotional project. And if your child's really having trouble with separations, what you've got is what we call an emotional project. It's going to take work on yourself, work building connection with your child, and work figuring out how to listen to the upset your child has about separating from you. Because it's a bunch of feelings, and it turns out those feelings drain if you are able to listen to them well. And yeah, anyway, I'll talk a bit more about that. So around separation, it's like, what's all the fuss about? Well, connection is a profound human need. And I like to talk about a couple of little examples of that. It turns out our brains work best in connection with others. And for instance, the depth, the way that we're oriented towards connecting with other human beings, they did some research into the movement patterns of twins in utero, and they discovered that the twins respond differently. They have different movement patterns when they're communicating with each other than they do when they're bumping up against the house they're living in, which is their mother's womb. But it's like, even at that point of existence, very, very early in their lives, twins are oriented towards the other human being in the room with them in a way that is quite profound and really different from how they interact with their, environment. And then the other little, every now and again, I notice something about how important connection is to me. And recently I had a sick day, and I had to go and make an appointment with the local GP. And I thought, oh, great, this will be easy. I'll do the telehealth. Well, it was the medical centre, and the young man he didn't know who I was. And I think he wanted to make sure I wasn't shirking. So he said, no, I'm not going to do it by telehealth. You'll have to come up. So I went up there and, said I wasn't feeling well and got a medical certificate. And I walked out of the surgery and I felt like 100% better. And I thought, I think it's just because of this little human interaction I've had it was in the middle of the lockdown. So we weren't having a lot of contact with other people, but just this interaction with this young man about a topic that wasn't particularly exciting. I've never met him before, and I probably will never meet him again. But it was really interesting to notice just what that connection did. And I think for me, one of the things about the whole lockdown thing was to kind of really notice how important all those sort of incidental connections are to my sense of being okay in the world. That's how important connection is. The connection we have with our children is way more profound, but we are oriented, we need that connection to function well. I like to say that in fact, connection greases the wheels of family life. If things are scratchy, if you're up against a big limit-setting challenge, if your child is very, very upset about you leaving, there's nothing wrong with you, there's nothing wrong with them, but the first place to start is to build connection in your family. Sometimes that's enough to just smooth things over and be able to not get snarled in that spot as often. Usually, and separation tends to be, as I said, not simple, not a one-off fix. It's an emotional project. It's actually one of the big emotional projects of being a young person. So connection helps. No, I lost my train of thought there, but anyway. So Separation is inevitable. It's part of growing up. You gradually move away from your parents. Dealing with feelings around separation are really important, because feelings tend to go underground. So just because a child stops crying after you've left them at daycare, and you know they're having a huge wail when you were there, you left, you rang up thinking, oh my God, I'm gonna have to go and pick them up again, and they're fine. Just because they're fine, and I may have a chance to talk about this, doesn't mean that the feeling's gone away. That those feelings will find other opportunities to bubble up, and they get bigger if we don't resolve them. Oops. Sorry, clicked the wrong button. So the other thing is that separations are repeated. You can't really avoid them. You'll do it many times. There'll be layers in it. So you'll go through a period. I think what happens is our children sort of grow, because they're developing, they stretch out, they notice their movement away from you, and that brings up feelings. And then there's a period of consolidation where they kind of, they're confident in their environment, they're kind of satisfied with where they're at, and there's a kind of easier time. And then developmentally they stretch out a bit, and again they get to notice that they're actually moving away from you, and that brings up feelings of separation. So there's nothing wrong if what if you work through a period where your child was really unhappy to leave you, and you got to a point where that was easier, and then suddenly 18 months later you find, or 6 months later you find it's back up again. And it will also show up often when there's other big things going on. So I'll talk about why that happens. But if there's been some seismic shift in the world, in your family, if there's some tension going on, that may show up as separation anxiety. So it can be about all sorts of things. It's actually one of the easier ones to tackle, believe it or not. So separations are deeply felt by both boys and girls. And even kids who are in great shape around it. Like I run play events every now and again, and we do a lot of playing with the kids, and they get this real sense that that the adults are really on their side. We play in a certain kind of way. And then the parents go off for a little, what I'll explain in a minute, what we call a listening partnership. So the parents go away for a short time, and the folk who are there, who are not the parents, are there. And often children will choose to have an upset at that point about their parent leaving, because partly we've done all this playing, we've really connected, and they notice when their parent is leaving, and we listen to that upset. And one play event, it actually was a class I ran about this sort of playing, and that mother was adamant that her boy was just cool about leaving, and he was confident and happy. But at this play date, he chose to have a huge cry about his mum leaving. And I just thought, everyone has feelings about having to be away from their parent or their loved ones. And it's helpful to provide opportunities for us to feel those feelings. And even if it looks like a child is transitioning easily, there may be some of those feelings around. And my point is that those feelings, if we don't handle them, if we don't find ways of building enough connection that then our child can be sad and we can listen, then those feelings will bubble up somewhere else. So they're deeply felt by both boys and girls. Boys are conditioned very early to squash down their feelings. So they may be able to sort of suck it up, but it's still there. So to understand the project, I like to talk about a relationship bank balance, just broadly this approach. So where there are lots of struggles and difficulties and upsets, often that's a sign that the credit the connection credit in your relationship bank balance is low. And when your children are able to cooperate and there's a sense of closeness and ease, that's often because the connection credit in your relationship is high. And sometimes you actually don't need to pay that much attention to the problem behavior. You just need to pay attention to what's the state of my connection in my relationship bank balance. That's the thing that will really make a difference. And separations, which are a limit, use up connection credit. So if there's not enough connection credit in your relationship and you're having to do, just the circumstances mean you have to do a whole lot of limit setting, that's not going to go as well and maintain your relationship in good shape if you haven't got a lot of credit in your relationship bank balance. So I just want to explain a little bit about what's going on for kids. This is actually true of us all, but children are in lots of ways better placed to recover than we adults are. They're born knowing how to do it, and gradually it gets sort of worked out of them so that we learn how to hang on to our feelings rather than process them. So what happens is that stressful experiences create emotional tension. And sometimes a child who's particularly fearful, if it shows up around aggression is one way that fear can show up, but it also can show up around worries about separation. It may be that that child has had, a hard time getting into the world. The pregnancy was difficult, or there was some particularly difficult experience in their early life that's showing up around separation, feelings about separation. Sleep is another issue that is an indication that a child's carrying fear. If there are sleep troubles, that's actually a separation issue as much as anything else. Children experience sleep as a separation. So if they're having trouble getting to sleep at night, that's why. So a child accumulates emotional tension, and they don't have to have had a trauma. Life in general as a small person leaves you plenty of things to feel a little scared about. So we don't really need to go hunting for why does my child, what was it that happened? And usually where parents go is, what did I do wrong? Well, it's like it doesn't matter really. What you've got is a challenge in front of you that you need to handle. But sometimes if you know the child, certainly I learned from having a child where I really understood the story closely from the beginning, that helped me to have a sense of where the emotional struggles had come from. But how I tackled them wasn't that different. I wouldn't have needed to know. But what happens is that feelings migrate, and in particular, fear is very sticky. So a fear of, one of my daughter's friends was really scared of cats. And, you have to be careful about giving people advice about how they can solve their child's emotional problems. So I didn't offer a lot of advice to my friend, but I was interested when he came up to me at a netball game that our kids were playing at and said, "Oh, we can't go out to a restaurant and eat out in the open anymore because my daughter's now scared of birds." And I thought that's a classic example of what happens. A little fear, every time that fear comes up, our children's brains shut down and other bits of information get stuck to it. And then that fear spreads and gets stuck on other bits of their life if we don't figure out how to handle it. And over time, so it snowballs, and what happens is our kids' ability to think and remain flexible in front of whatever the challenge is gets more and more limited, and they'll show us that they're carrying around this emotional backpack that's getting heavier and heavier by going off track. So behavior challenges are actually a child's they're sending you up a signal that they're in trouble. And often children will choose big issues no, small issues to have big feelings about. And we call that a pretext. So in many ways, sometimes a child's feelings about being away from you actually are about something else. Yeah. And it also, this emotional dynamic explains why kids can get really upset about the most ridiculous things, like the way that you cut their sandwich, the fact that you put Vegemite on it instead of peanut butter, that someone else has got some toy that they really feel like they want. It's like the amount of upset here really is disproportionate to the problem at hand. That's almost always a sign that they're trying to find a pretext to have a big bunch of feelings about that have been hanging around about all sorts of things. So where we can, knowing that responding well to all those little upsets and finding actually listening to those upsets, which I will talk about what that actually means in a minute, but that actually is draining the bucket of feelings about big places that are getting in our kids' way. And just because they're not showing the feelings doesn't mean they're not feeling them. So kids around separation, some kids manage to figure out that it's not safe. So what's happening in that dynamic where you drop them off at daycare and they're really upset about you leaving, like that's actually quite complex. And if you're interested, get in touch, because I've got a little video where I explain what's going on and why that happens the way it does. But the short version is, while you're there, it's safe for them to feel the separation. When you move away, it's not safe anymore. It doesn't mean they're in a bad place, but just that the kind of emotional safety that your relationship offers is no longer available because they're at daycare, the ratio of adults to children is really different. So you know, that there's not space for them to have a big upset. So many children are able to sort of stuff that down, and generally, I worked in preschool for a while, and generally, you know, the odd kid dribbles through the day with tears most of the day, but that's quite rare. Mostly kids can pull their attention off, notice their friends are there, and engage in what's interesting in the day. But that doesn't mean that those feelings about you leaving have actually been resolved. They've just learnt how to manage them. And the next opportunity to feel the separation, which might, for instance, be bedtime, which children experience as a separation, up those feelings come. So any chance you can get to deal with those feelings will be useful. And when this is the guts of it, when children feel safe, they'll have upsets. It's not a bad sign, which is really different from most of what we learned as young people and what gets taught, I think, and what we get told. Feelings are fine. They just need to be listened to, or they go underground. So tears contain stress hormones, and they're the way human beings release grief. And actually, tantrums are not defiance. Tantrums are the way children release frustration. They're short, sharp, hot, and they're how human beings release frustration. We adults have a little more difficulty. Most of us didn't get listened to well around tantrums, and so by the time we're grown up, we have trouble managing our frustrations. But yeah, someone described, for an adult, tantrum is that moment where you want to throw your computer out the window because it's not working properly. Like, that helped me understand, what does adult frustration look like? What does a tantrum look like? I had a little one last night, really, but it wasn't nearly as honest as a kid's one was. Would have been better if I'd got to stomp my feet, I think. So laughter heals fears. It's very, very important. There's a reason why little kids laugh when the teacher tells them off. It's not actually disrespect. It's that they're scared and they're sort of instinctively looking for a place to release that fear. And if you've ever hung in there with a little one when they really get going and resisted the temptation to stop them, a child who really launches into an upset, they will sweat, they will struggle, they will shake, they will scream. And those are all ways that emotional tension is released. So those things we've traditionally come to understand as being bad news are actually good news. And how we respond to them is what I would call time in. This is an approach which is about time in for children and time out for parents. So just to summarize, what happens is children accumulate emotional tension. It results in them feeling disconnected. Sometimes, disconnection can cause like emotional tension. So being away from you and not getting to have feelings about it, or not getting to show how they feel about it, they accumulate emotional tension. And what happens is children will signal for help. I don't want to go to preschool. I don't want to go to school. I don't want to eat my peas. I'm going to bop my sister. I don't want to do my homework. That's one of ours. So we call them signals, and they're a request for help, actually. And the challenge is not to fix that. We parents have this biological imperative to fix problems. And that's wonderful. It's kept the species alive, but it doesn't deal with the emotional challenge that our kids are up against. So some of the time we need to resist the temptation to fix the problem. And you've probably all had that experience of, the sippy cup's the wrong colour, so you change the sippy cup. And then the sandwich is cut wrong, so you recut the sandwich. And then they can't tie up their shoes, so you tie up their shoes for them. And then, they want to sit on the other side of the car. When a child's really pushing for some help, no amount of fixing up will generally work. That's a sign that they're carrying emotional tension and they're looking for a place to offload it. They're actually looking for you to set a limit. Sweetheart, you need to sit on this side of the car. I know you don't want to. Yeah. So that's a limit. That's a limit. And that's you listening to their upset. And it's amazing how when you do that, a child will be able to cooperate. It's not a miracle cure. Sometimes it takes an organised effort. And separations is one of those organised efforts. But if we bring a limit and we interrupt the off-track behaviour and we connect, interrupting, I'm not going to no, you need to sit on this side of the car, honey. I know. So you connect, you make eye contact, and you stop the off-track behaviour. And then you listen to the upset that comes up. And on the other side of it, thinking follows. They'll be able to do what they need to do. So what do we do about separation anxiety? Well, there's 5 steps. So we will quickly run through them. As I said, if you want to know more about the detail of how all of this works, I really recommend the short video course. You'll find your way to it from my website, which is www.madelinewinter, MADELEINE, winter.com. I think it's in the top menu there, but there's links you'll get later. So 5 steps. We need to plan. We need to connect. It's the second step. Then we need to listen. And the listening tool we use there is called Stay Listening. And the approach is called the long goodbye. Then we need to leave. It's fine to leave. And what we'll need to do is listen later. Listen for upsets at other times when we've got the time. And when we come back, we need to reconnect. And we reconnect partly by the same way we connected in the first place, which is using the listening tool of special time and listening, taking opportunities to listen to our kids' upsets. And part of planning, the first step, is this idea that timeout is really important for parents. So when your kid's off track and you start to lose it, you need timeout. Timeout's great for getting you out of the way when you're no longer got any slack for whatever it is your child's turning on. Because you can't respond in a way that will allow enough connection when you're in that place. So you need time out. You need to download how you're feeling. You need support. You need a place to plan and get some help with figuring out how to handle this challenge better and why it's hard for you. And kids, when they're in trouble, need time in. You need time out, and the kids need time in. They need a place to connect, to show and release their feelings, and then thinking follows. So if we were together in person, we would get to have a little try of this listening tool. So when we're not in a pandemic anymore, hoping that we will get out of it one day, come along to one of my workshops in Randwick, which I've run periodically, and you'll get a chance to have a go at a listening partnership, or join one of my groups, which most of them run on Zoom and always have. Where we practice this listening process. So if you want to know more about it, it's very, very helpful. I find it, I couldn't function without it really. But we need a place where we can talk about how we're feeling. And sometimes issues around separation, sometimes they're as much to do with how we're feeling as they are to do with our children's challenges. So how do you feel? You want to set up a listening time, which I'll explain in a minute, where you get to talk about how you feel about leaving your child, about what goodbyes were like when you were a child, and about planning for upsets. One of the great Achilles heels, there's a few Achilles heels of parenting, places we get predictably skittled. One of them is around feeling bad, even if we've done the worst thing in the world. As soon as we end up feeling like we're a bad parent, our brain capacity to actually deal with the problem and fix things up is just hugely reduced. So we have to be very careful about going down that track. And one of the other parenting Achilles heels is that we hope that the thing that has been difficult every other time up until now, we're incredibly hopeful, and we hope that it won't happen again this time. So we need to actually plan we need to plan the process of separating, and plan to have it. The main trick is to plan to have built in enough connection time, and then to plan to build in enough time to actually listen to your child's upset. And a great place to do that planning is, got to be careful here. A great place to do that planning is in a listening partnership. So a listening partnership is where we find someone who will swap listening time with us. And we take turns, we time it, because some people are great talkers. I'm one of them. And other people are more reluctant, or it takes them longer, or they feel, they're a bit shy. But we all have a story to tell, and everybody's brain, I haven't met anyone who can't use listening time, basically. Our brains will find the place that we need to talk. So when it's our turn to listen, we listen with warmth, with our full attention. We don't interrupt or give advice. And we really, there's a lot of advice that comes at parents. We need a space where someone will listen to us. And the thing that makes it safe for us to do that is that it's completely and utterly confidential. So we won't mention it later. If we swap time and it's my turn to listen, my turn to talk, I might talk about a similar topic, because we're often reminded by other people's stories of our own story, and that's fine. But I will not start to talk about it by way of your story. So I won't say, oh, I know exactly how you feel about leaving Tommy at preschool, and I agree with you. That teacher's, you don't need to do that. You can just say, it breaks my heart when I have to drop my child at preschool, if that's what your story is. So it's really important to keep it confidential, that you don't mention it anywhere else. They won't mention it anywhere else, even the smallest thing. And that way, you know, there's somewhere where you can talk about what it's really like to parent, because it's tricky to find those places where you can talk about what's really going on. It's a very judgmental space. So the next thing you need to do after you've got a bit of support for yourself is to connect. So when we connect, I recommend a listening tool called Special Time. Just wonderful. The longer I work with it in my own relationship with my child, and the longer that I work with parents, the more powerful I get to see that this tool is. It can do all sorts of things. What we are working on helping us do in this context is building a sense of connection, so that when we bring the limit, which in this case is when we say, sweetheart, I have to go, that our child will be able to carry the gift of our love with them when they're away, but also it warms things up and makes it safe for a child to actually show that they get to trust that we are on their side, and they can show us where they're having trouble. So they sometimes the better the connection, the bigger the upsets are. I know, sounds odd. But it's like, that's actually a good sign generally, that your child feels safe to show you how much they don't want you to leave. We need to go away and work on how that makes us feel. It's, you know, it just can be so hard for a child to be so broken about leaving us. And sometimes we need to check that where we're leaving them is okay. But so long as we know that where we're leaving them is okay, then really the issue is just that they're having some feelings about leaving us. An example is in the second year that my daughter went to preschool, on the drive to preschool, she said something that made me think, oh, you're feeling a little worried about, well, you've got some feelings about separating from me. And what was really useful was that I wasn't surprised, because we've just spent the whole summer together. So she feels really connected to me. So she's going to feel more deeply that we're about to separate. But I knew she was going to a preschool where she just loved it. She loved the people there. She loved the teachers there. She had lots of friends there. It was a really good place. That was helpful, because it's like, oh, it's not that there's something wrong with where she's going. It's that she's just got some feelings about leaving me. And that makes it easier to deal with it. Sometimes there's something wrong with what your child is going to, and their big feelings are about that, and you may need to do something about that. But a lot of the time, it's just that the separation is about to happen, and feelings of sadness are hanging around and waiting to come up and be listened to. So special time is a one-on-one playtime where we set a timer. This is for children under about 12. Once they get older than that, it's good to try and do it as formally as this, but it often doesn't work for a whole bunch of reasons I won't get into. But if you're here and you have bigger kids, feel free to get in touch. But we set a timer and we announce it. Sweetheart, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but I'll do whatever you want to do. And you bring to that time extra warmth, eye contact. You look for places where there can be some laughter without ridicule, without tickling. Tickling's not useful. It overpowers children. But laughter is. So if you notice that there's something that gets people laughing, then you can see if you can't keep it going. But special time's not really about that. Special time is about giving your child a chance to have things go their way. So you don't give them any instruction or advice, and you don't make it conditional. So, sweetheart, if you go off to preschool, you know, and you don't make a big upset, we can do some special time. Special time doesn't work that way. Special time works to front end things. So sometimes doing some special time fills up their cup of connection enough that they can go off without feeling a whole lot of upset about leaving you, because they're able to keep hold of that sense of connection will get them through the day. Sometimes the sense of connection means that the separation is more deeply felt, and that's good if you've got time to listen to it. But special time, works in all sorts of fantastic ways. Children will choose to do all sorts of different things in special time. And your job is just to do the best you can to go their way. People often ask, how often should I do it and how long should we do it? It depends. It's incredibly flexible. If 5 minutes is all you've got, then 5 minutes is fine. I'd be recommending that you find a time in the week where you can offer yourself a little longer, and you need to put away your distractions and really commit yourself to being there. I must say, when I became a parent, I kind of, I was surprised at how much time was spent just doing all the work that's involved. And I was really a bit shocked at how easy it was to get through the day without really having made a chance to really pay attention to my child. It was not that I was negligent. It's just that when you first become, I certainly thought I was just going to have a love fest. And actually, it's just a whole lot of work most of the time. So I really needed to, special time was a way I could really carve out a time where I could just delight in my child. It does all sorts of other things. It's a way that it becomes safe for children to show you things. They'll tell you stuff in special time that they might not tell you otherwise, because children don't usually rock up to you and grab your hand and say, I had a hard day today. But they might do things, choose to play games in special time that will tell you where their interests are, where their worries are. Sometimes it'll tell you bits about what's happened to them. It's very useful. That's why it's really useful as a reconnecting process. It will give you some information about what's been going on. I could do a whole talk on special time. So if you've got some questions later, you're welcome to ask them. But the next step in the process is to listen. And the process around separations we call the long goodbye. So this is where you can actually set up a leaving process that will bring up your child's feelings about being left when you've got time to listen. Because a lot of the time we're pushed to get them to preschool or get them to school, to deliver them on time and get ourselves off to work or wherever it is we have to go. And we actually feel like we don't have the time to listen. The thing about separation feelings is they come up whenever a separation is likely to happen. Our children, if they've got big feelings about separating, those feelings will come up. So all we have to do is propose a separation. I remember doing a lot of work on this with my daughter early on Sunday mornings. I didn't actually really have to go anywhere, but I could propose, sweetheart, I'm gonna leave now, honey, or I'm gonna leave in 15 minutes. The warning thing is tricky. We often warn our children because we're hoping to avoid the upset, and we need to learn that warning where it works best is actually a process of bringing to a child's attention that you are actually going to leave, that there is going to be a separation. And you start early enough that if your child starts to be upset about that prospect, that you can just stop at that point, a long way from actually leaving, and begin the process of listening to their upset. So you propose to leave, sweetheart, and bedtime's quite similar. It's time for bed, sweetie, or it'll be time for bed in half an hour. And sometimes that's enough for a child to start agitating about the fact that you're going to leave. And because you're not actually under pressure this time to leave, you can take the time to listen. So the things you can say, and generally when a child's upset and you're wanting to hold them there, what you want to use is we say 5 words or less. 5 words or less. Because once you say more than that, what you've started to do is try and appeal to their reasoning mind. When your child's upset, they really, their reasoning mind is not there. It's unavailable, offline. Getting rid of, releasing the upset will bring it back online. And we tend to go for trying to reason with our children. What's happening there is we're looking for their reasoning, thinking mind. We sometimes sort of, we have the wrong idea that the problem is they don't have enough information or they don't understand well enough. Mostly our kids understand. And in fact, when we were doing a lot of work around early separation with my daughter, I used to find it interesting that so you'll start with a proposal, and what happens is your child will notice that you're going to leave and they'll have a chunk of feelings there, and if you can just stop and listen, that tends to dry up, and then you need to bring their attention to the fact that you're going to leave again. So you may just say again, sweetheart, I am going to leave. Or you might have to do something, you might have to step away, or you might need to, I did this work with my daughter's dad, so I'm going to give you to dad, sweetie, because I'm going to go. And sometimes all I'd have to do is just begin to lift her to her father, and she would start to cry a bit more about it. I know, sweetheart. I care. I do need to go. Yeah, you're completely safe with dad. I will always come back to you, honey. I think that's a piece of information children really need to hear. I will always come back to you. Because if you possibly can, you will. And sometimes we go down some rabbit hole of what happens if something happens to me and I can't get back to them. And then I actually don't think we need to go there. The chances of that happening are so low. We'll handle that when it happens. But the bottom line is 99.9% of the time, we'll be able to come back. They need to know that we're planning to come back and that we will come back. The other thing is it's really important not to sneak away from your kids. Because what that does is have them feeling unsure that they can count on you being there. It really cuts their sense of connection with you. We often do that because we want to avoid the upset. My advice is if your child tends to be really upset around separations, figure out how to set it up at a time when you can listen. And that will drain the bucket. But sneaking away in the hope of not having an upset just makes children feel insecure. It actually lays in a hurt. So don't do that. So don't try and fix the problem. You know, we tend to do this as parents. We end up with a whole bunch of workarounds, you know, and what happens is, which is fine. We do it. We all do it. What tends to happen is that if a child's got a big emotional backpack, the workarounds get to be more and more trouble until we get to a point where, the workaround's more effort than dealing with the emotional problem that's underneath. So, you know, don't try and fix it. Don't try and make it easier for them to separate from you, unless you've got to the point where you really have to leave and, you know, you can't, or you've lost it and you just cannot hear another wail, in which case give them their blankie. But all those attachments little ones get to things like toys and blankets and silkies and stuff, those are all fine, but they're a way a child has of managing their feelings about you, about being away from you, managing their fears. Again, a bit like proposing a separation, those are really, I love it when people tell me that they've got that problem, because all you have to do is propose to separate from blankie or silky or dummy or whatever, and feelings will be available. So that gives you lots of flexibility about when you take it on and when you don't. But ultimately, it's worth taking it on, because those feelings when they're a year old are going to be the same set of feelings that happen when they start school. The more you've drained them when they're a year old, and it's easier to drain them with little ones, the less of a challenge it's likely to be when they come to some bigger separation down the track. So don't try and fix it, and listen for as long as you can. And, you know, once you get to the point, so we call this stay listening. I lost the track of my thought. So the thing that would bring my daughter, I remember distinctly at about a year, but somewhere between a year and 18 months, the thing that would make her notice I was going to leave, when we were doing this long goodbye, I would reach for my car keys. But it's like, how did she, like, she's so smart. She knows when I get the car keys, I'm really going to go. So she doesn't need more information. She's got heaps of information about the world. What she needs is to feel sad about the fact that I'm going to leave. And you inch your way to just making that separation a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. As they drain their feelings about being this far away from you, they'll have some feelings about this far away from you, and then about this far away from you. So that's why we call it the long goodbye. Take your time with it. It's really worth it. We call this stay listening, where a child starts to be upset, we move close, we make it safe. So if they're throwing things around, we need to stop that. We make time and space for feelings. We actually plan where we can. We tell them that we're going to leave, and then we listen. And we remember that the upset is the healing process. The upset is not some difficulty we have to get over. It is a difficulty we need to get through. So it's the healing process. On the other side of it, it will be a child who's relaxed, who's deeply connected to you, and is relaxed about the fact that you're going to leave, at least for a while. And then the next step is to leave, and know that later on you'll reconnect. Your child may show you some feelings then about how it was for them to be away from you. But it's fine to leave. You'll have plenty of other opportunities to listen to your kids about how sad they are about being away from you. You can leave, and you want to be pretty sure they're in an environment where they're actually it's a good place for them to be. So say goodbye and leave. And then when you come back, I recommend, first thing, do some special time, reconnect, have them remember again that you're really on their side. And what will happen if a child has got some feelings they didn't manage to get through is that they'll show you a whole bunch of little heartbreaks, and they're a gift. When you've got the time, you don't have to fix the problem. You can just listen. Because that little heartbreak about losing Teddy, or about, I don't know, any number of other little things, little ones. Mine's big now, so it's not as sharp in my mind, all those little things that, my child used to get upset about. But all those little things that just aren't quite right. They don't want to leave now. They don't want to stop playing. They don't want to put those shoes on. They don't want to go for a walk. All those little things they don't want to do. And start to get upset about. If you've got time, you can listen. They're all connected, and they will help build your child's sort of drain the cup of big feelings, so that they can remember that you're connected. So that's pretty much what I've got to say today. There's always a whole lot more to say. We might just see, Marie, if there's any questions people have got.
Hello. Thank you for that, Madeleine. It's always very informative, especially when you have to, talk to yourself for a bit when you're sitting online. So it's really great, and that was fantastic. So, guys, I just want to open it up to you all. If anyone has any questions, now's the time to pop them through into the Q&A chat. And as they come through, I can have a quick look at them and then let Madeleine know. Okay, so we have one question here from Lauren. So Lauren's asked, how do you propose special time with young twins, especially when only one parent is available?
Mm. This is the big challenge. Special time's always a challenge. Special time's always a challenge, but it is much more of a challenge if you have more than one child. And in my experience, it can help to have a listening partnership where you get to think through your routine and where you might be able to find a place where you get one-on-one time with each of your children. My experience is that what you will have to do if you have more than one child is schedule it, or it won't happen. And once you've done that, it tends to stay in the structure of your family life. Those of us who have only one child, we can be a bit more flexible about it. And what I notice happens is it drops off. There are ways that special time can be quite hard for us, like we probably didn't get played with in that way. We don't get enough support and we're a bit tired. Sometimes our children will choose to do things in special time that we don't want to do, which is part of what works with special time. That's part of what it's for, is this time-limited thing, time-limited space where a child can actually do things that normally we wouldn't allow. So that can make special time feel hard anyway. So getting it in the schedule is really useful. The bottom line is that both your children, they want and need a direct line into you where they're not having to compete with their sibling for your attention. And twins are wonderful and their connection with each other is extraordinary and really adds, I think, to their sense of being in the world. But they will have always been competing for your attention. So I think it's not easy, but frankly, I think it's worth, if you've got the resources, it's worth finding. It's really good for your other child to have a relationship with someone else. So if you can find someone that can spend time with one of your kids while you do special time with the other. One of the things I would say about it is that especially at first, you really want to have the other kid out of the way. And I found in general that it was difficult doing special time in any kind of public space. And the reason is that kids can smell this good thing a mile off, and before you know where you are, you've got several children, which is not special time anymore. So it's not easy, but thinking about the thinking that you have to do to build some support around yourself so that you get enough of a break for yourself and for you to be able to figure out how to have time with each of your children separately. That thinking and organising, that's what will build the resource around your family that you need anyway. So yeah, it's not easy. Yeah.
So we'll move on to the next question. I hope that was answered for you, Lauren. So the next one we have from Anne, pardon me. What is your advice on helping with bedtime? And then we have a follow-up, reluctancy to go to bed. Now, before you answer that, Madeleine, I do have another question here from Michael, which is also about sleep time. So it's quite similar. Our kids want us in the room in order for them to fall asleep, moving to the doorway, to the corridor, just outside the room. Now we've been dragged back in the bedroom. Any tips that are different for bedtime? So we've got two bedtime questions here.
Bedtime, we might do a webinar on bedtime at some point. And in fact, if bedtime is basically a separation issue. So the project isn't that separate, isn't that different from the long goodbye. Hand in Hand have another self-guided video course called Helping Children Sleep. And with bedtime in particular, I really encourage parents, because we get so desperate about getting a decent sleep, and it's one of those areas where we get a bit of information. We often go in hard with a hard limit around you've got to sleep on your own, and that's not going to work. What you really need to do around bedtime challenges is actually develop a plan. I would highly recommend the Hand in Hand Parenting short course on helping children sleep. And my advice would be do whatever you can to get through the sleep challenge, whether it's getting to bed or waking up at night, until you have a plan. And then there'll be a series of steps. And the first bit will be about really making sure you get special time. And another tool called play listening, which is physical play usually, but any kind of play where there's laughter, but where it's led by the children, where the children are in charge. But special time, really warming up the relationship, so they really know you're on their side, and then proposing. So the difficulty may be that they don't want to go to sleep on their own at night. So you would start the project. I recommend, it's great if you want to ring up and organise a short chat. We can talk about it some more, but it's very useful to propose it. And I would, if you're going to tackle it, because it's a big deal, stuff around sleep is a big deal. Part of what wakes kids up at night is fear, which they manage in the day. They can manage it in the day, but when their prefrontal cortex is down, which it is when they're asleep, those fears bubble up. So there's a certain set of fears that come up around bedtime or at night that often won't show anywhere else. So, and they need to be handled well. So, and it's one of those spots where we ourselves are stressed by having our sleep broken. So it's a tricky situation. But you would propose, sweetheart, we're gonna have one story. Well, often what a sign that they're putting it off is they want another story and another story and another story. That's where your workaround stops working. You know, it's like no amount of stories will somehow make that feeling go away. They need to have the feeling. So you might set a limit by saying, sweetheart, we're just going to have 2 stories tonight, and then I'm going to leave. So what probably will happen is they may start to get upset about it at that point. So you take as much time. You can even start making the proposal a week ahead of time. And what you want to be looking for is where they start to get upset about it. Listening to their upsets in the daytime will help. It all drains the bucket. And then what it is a gradual process of leaving, but slowly, so that you're allowing them to feel what it feels like for you to move to the end of the bed. I'm going to leave now, sweetheart. You'll be fine. I'm just in the next room. You'll be fine. And then they sort of stop. And then it sort of backs off a bit. And so then you just move yourself a little bit further down the bed. So it's the same slow separation, so they get to notice their feelings at every bit of distance from you. If you stay there, they won't get to feel it. Because, of course, that's how it is with separation. We often do the fix. So we stay. But that doesn't help in some ways. It doesn't give them the chance to feel the separation. So if you stay there and you do this long bedtime thing and eventually they drop off because they're exhausted, that's fine. But 1, it's exhausting you probably. And 2, you're not getting to underneath to get through to the problem, the emotional problem that's underneath. So it's a great thing to tackle. It's a little trickier than your average separation. And the other piece of information that I think is really useful to have if that kind of issue is the one that's giving you trouble, is that this is a tricky idea. Consistency isn't vital. This is different from what you will hear most of the places. Consistency isn't vital because you're not trying to teach your child to sleep on their own. It's not a process, a rational process. They can't drop off to sleep on their own because they're racked by fear. And what you want to do is give them a chance to feel that fear and set up a project that's around that. You're not trying to teach them how to keep the fear under control so they can go to sleep, because if they do get to sleep, my experience is that fear will bubble up sometime and they'll be waking up at night, or that fear will bubble up around leaving you at school when they have to go to school, or, you know. So if you're not trying to teach them the right way to get themselves to sleep, then it doesn't matter if it's an emotional project, and it doesn't matter if for 2 nights you listen to them be upset about the prospect that you might be going to leave, or you manage to actually get out to the door or out the door before they drop off to sleep or whatever. And then the next night you're really tired. This is particularly the case if a child's fears are waking them in the night. If you're really tired, then I recommend take a week off. Take a few nights off. Do whatever you have to do to get them to sleep. Do whatever you do. Bring them into the bed with you. Do whatever you have to do to get everybody back to sleep for a bit, and then take it on again when you've got a bit more slack, because they're not going to learn the wrong thing. They'll get a certain way through an emotional project where you can help them, and then when you've both run out of steam, then you can back off for a bit and come back to it later. But feel free to get in touch. Sleep projects are complicated.
Cool. Thank you for that, Madeleine. And now I have one final question. It's another bedtime related question, and I think this might be our last one for this morning.
Okay. Let's do bedtime for our next topic.
Yes, I think we have a winner there. All right, so Tessa has popped in a question. Any tips for bedtime after daycare? Always seems harder than on a non-childcare day.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me at all. The reason is sleep is experienced as a separation. So there is less connection because your child's been away from you all day. And they've probably got some feelings about having been away from you. Like they've felt the separation. Probably at daycare, there hasn't been a lot of space to actually have the big sadness that they wanted to have. I mean, the idea would be that the staffing ratios were such that we could leave our children there, someone else could listen to them, and we would come back and it'd all be cheesy. And in a perfect world, there'd be more of that sort of help. But it ends up that we have to do the work. So what you've got there is the backlog from either things are tricky at daycare, or they've just got feelings about being away from you. So it's the same. You really want to do, if you're noticing a particular time in the week where things are tricky, there's probably a pattern. And it's worth thinking about, what is that pattern? It's great that you're noticing it's on the days of daycare. So there's something about the whole daycare experience likely to be just that. They've got bigger feelings of separation. So you want to really reconnect. So I'd be doing a really solid special time as soon as you can when you get home. And that may be enough to refill their cup of connection so that the separation that they have to face at bedtime isn't so big, or they've got more grease to smooth that wheel. If it isn't enough, if getting well connected isn't enough to get them over the hump of easily going to sleep, then what you have is a bunch of feelings that will be closer to the surface because you're more connected. So then you can know that on those nights you've got that project, which is about bringing up the prospect of separation and doing a slow goodbye. But a big part of it is, so often we put ourselves on the back foot as parents because we don't notice that this is a problem that happens regularly at this time of the week after this experience. That, just noticing that is really empowering. So you know that it's going to be scratchy when you get home from preschool, and that bedtime's going to be tricky. So you might do a good chunk of special time, get dinner on early and start the bedtime thing earlier, so that if somewhere in that process you manage to help your child bump into some of the feelings that they've been hanging on to, there's time to listen to those feelings before it gets too late and everybody's exhausted. Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
All right. Well, that brings us to the close of this morning's webinar.
Let me put my next little slide on. I should have turned the slides off there for a bit. But anyway, cool. So I love to stay in touch. We'll send you recordings and links, and really do feel free to book a time to chat. So, and thank you, Marie, for your help.
Yeah, not a problem at all.
Great to hear this.
Yeah, of course. And just to let all of you who are still logged on know, I will be sending out an email towards the end of the week with the link for the recording, which will be available on Randwick City Council's website, as well as some links and some other documents and stuff from Madeleine, who she'll kindly pass on to me, and I'll send on to the rest of you guys. But yeah, thank you so much for joining. We're open to feedback. Please feel free to flick me through an email. In terms of today's session, and we'd love to see you in our future webinars. So thank you all very much and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Your time is so precious.
Yes, agreed.
Okay.